So, speaking of Joe, I already mentioned he's the chair of the Higher Education Technology Managers Association. He works at the University of Southern California, so he is actually working in higher ed tech. No better person, I think, to talk about what the last couple of years have meant and how things are headed. So let's bring him on. Joe, are you with us?
I am here. Hey, thank you for having me on. And first off, yes, there are a lot better people who could talk about this than me, but I still appreciate you inviting me.
Well, let's be clear. I'm talking about people who answered the phone when I called, right? The guys who didn't answer, they can't be on the show, right? So no better for
You
us.
know, you got to keep going down the list, but here I am.
Yeah, well, thank you for joining us. I didn't mention it yet, but I wanted to. The reason that Joe is on the show, we do the news segment. You just saw us do it last year, episode 4 or 5. I found an article that Joe had written called "Past, Present, and Present Again." And when I talk about technology, when I present, I like to look at history and see the big long-term trends. When I'm talking about AV over IP against a matrix switch, I think back to, the 1930s and the introduction of television and how we got there, right? And I read this article from Joe where he talked about how Aristotle taught things and what an impact the printing press was as a piece of higher ed, of AV technology for learning. And I said, wow, I thought I was throwing it back 100 years. This guy's going for millennia. This is amazing. I got to meet him. So thanks for the article, Joe, because I really did enjoy it. And it's what inspired me to say, hey, this is the guy I'm going to call. Forget those other people who are better qualified to talk about this. I want to talk to Joe. And he can tell us
Always
about
throw some Aristotle in there.
It's amazing. It's amazing. Why don't you start by telling us a little bit about, can I call it HETMA? Save a little time there.
Absolutely, yes. So HETMA, the Higher Education Technology Managers Alliance, which is definitely a mouthful, is an advocacy group. We're created in order to be able to advocate and speak for the needs of the higher education vertical within the greater AV industry. As your graphic showed, higher ed education accounts for $27 billion in annual spend within the AV industry, which is no small chunk. But also professionals within the higher ed vertical have been more aligned with the integrators and really are consider ourselves in-house integrators as end users, but also those who have found ourselves to be more professional. Like when I got my SDVoE certification at a show, and I was in a room with half of us being higher ed people from within the area. And so as we start to do that, we recognize the need to be able to advocate for ourselves and speak for the vertical and the special needs that we have. And that's really what we're there for. So that is HETMA's purpose.
What I wanted to ask is, what is it about you folks in higher ed that gives you that, I don't know what I want to call it, it's like a do-it-yourself kind of spirit. I know there are many talented AV people in the corporate space that own their spaces and do a good job of managing them. But it feels like they do lean on their consultants, on their integrators, more than the university guys. What's that about?
I love that you kind of the do-it-yourself spirit, kind of that go at it. But I'll tell you, there is a secret behind the scenes. A little bit is, we recognize that we are tighter and closer to our end users than most anybody else and the other verticals, right? Because as people working for an institution, we have our own customers, right? We can't just go and have a consultant come and design the system, an integrator come in, put it in, and then leave, because we're the ones having to deal with it later. So what we've recognized is our unique position to be able to kind of speak for those who are going to use the space, but also then serve as a mediator there between the rest of the industry and have our integrators come in, and we can speak for and be the voice for the ones who are going to end up using the space, because we're the ones who are going to have to support it. Likewise, because even though our institutions, so we have a lot of, one things that HETMA does is we have our back-end channels where we're not necessarily alone. We're a great community behind the scenes that everybody doesn't necessarily notice. And so therefore we can get together and we can think tank for ourselves, where we might go into our back-end Slack channels and say, hey, I have this problem. How have you solved it? And you'll get 20 or 30 different schools chiming in saying, well, this is how I did it. Look at this product. Here's, a special specialist and SME that I used. Why don't you reach out to them? So we have a network that really we can build upon and we can, support one another with, that you just don't necessarily see, which is also very unique in the AV industry. A lot of times you won't see, no private company is going to go call their competitor and say, hey, how did you solve this, right? You're going to rely on other channels, where we don't have that. Our schools might, compete against one another for students, but as tech managers within the institutions, we're all colleagues, whether it be small schools, larger schools, private schools, public schools, whatever. We all face similar challenges, and therefore we recognize that and can kind of come together and support one another in that way. So that's kind of the secret sauce behind the scenes.
That's that's what I never thought of, that last point you touched on, that the corporate guys fundamentally are out there competing with each other, and there's a spirit of collaboration, of collegiality among universities and educational institutions that is just fundamentally different than what the for-profit corporate world is out there to achieve. That's fascinating. I never thought about that. You also talked about the liaison that you create between the technology and your users. Now I want to turn to these past couple of years, and you know what? There's something on my mind that I want to say to the audience, and I briefed you on this, Joe. There are a few special keywords that if I say them, it sets off these weird flags in Google and YouTube and starts giving me trouble on our advertising and promotion platform. So when I say things like the last couple of years and, things have been very different for higher ed, and there's a C word I'm not saying and things like that, it's because I'm avoiding those keywords. I think it's a little strange. I'm not trying to sit here and promote misinformation. I'm trying to talk about how our world has changed. But anyway, that's why I'm speaking in so many euphemisms. So bear with me. Joe, these last couple of years have vastly accelerated whatever trends may have existed or new towards hybrid learning environments, towards unified collaboration, towards everybody being on Zoom or Teams all the time. How has it been for you as someone who I assume part of your role is to train and support your users in the use of this new technology that they got shoved into all of a sudden? So what in the world was that like?
Let me tell you, it was the most frustrating, confusing, scary, and exciting time that we could ever have imagined in higher ed. It's been said, over and over again, right? You've seen it that, technology advanced 5 years in 5 days and all these other things, which were all true, right? And in higher ed, we were really kind of primed for it. If you look at things like software-defined ecosystems and UC technologies and AV over IP technologies, our industry was already ready for it, right? We were there. It's just what was missing was mass adoption. Okay, it took a major global event for that mass adoption to happen. And so as we all went and moved to hybrid learning, we had to figure out that we have a problem meaning content needs to be delivered globally, right, in real time, and to be able to still support our customers, the tuition paying students. And yet we never thought about that in our classrooms. We never thought, well, what if we had to deliver this without anybody there? How are we going to do that? And so that's where we recognized, hey, UC platforms were there, whichever one you want to use. Network technology is already there, whichever one you want to use, right? It now said, hey, okay, well now how can we adopt this? And so what we saw was as everybody moved online, our campuses got empty. And we all got to say, well, now what? And we also had administrators saying, now what? How are you going to solve this? How are you going to bring us back? Where maybe at the table, we used to sit there and go, we would have to argue for our new technology. We'd have to argue for the budgets to do this stuff. And the next thing you know is you've got the government throwing money around to every school saying, here, you need to upgrade, you need to solve this problem. How are you going to do it? And now we have a voice in the table. Exactly, right? And so now we had that ability to say, okay, let's rethink. How are we going to do this? Can we utilize this, this unique situation in order to advance our own campuses, advance us years? And that's where I think we really sit. And I think now, and even going back, you had the write-in question earlier of what hasn't changed. Well, what hasn't changed was the need for information and the need for community. And this is where, going back to my other answer about like Hetman's purpose, is we also could get together and go, okay, where is AV? Where is the technology going? What are we seeing at Infocom? I mean, and this is what when you did walk the floor at Infocom, you saw everything: software defined, network defined, software defined. That was it. That's what we saw. As we saw the direction the AV industry moving in, and as a vertical, we got empty rooms for 2 years to say, let's put this in and let's go for it. And I think that's going to be the biggest change. And I see higher ed really leading the charge in the future, because we've had that opportunity to jump ahead where maybe, standard businesses, corporations didn't really get that opportunity, where we did. And we had to do it in volume. We had to do it in hundreds of rooms. And I think that's a huge advantage for us.
Yeah. Yeah. Scale is, what do they say? Quantity is its own kind of quality. Were there any major trends for you that existed that were running along in 2018, 2019 that suddenly got derailed? That's no longer the direction we're heading. What happened there? And we've got about a minute.
Yeah. You're only gonna give me a minute to give an answer. I don't know if I can do that. We'll
have you back on the after show. Don't worry.
I was thinking about that before too, of what were the conversations we were having. And it's interesting that none of us were talking about the Zooms, the Teams, those things in the classrooms. But we were thinking of, should we lecture? What about the flipped classroom? How do we do, the rooms with 6 screens around them and everyone collaborates here and goes here? And now that's crickets. Now you sit there and go, well, why do we need that? Everybody's screen is the laptop they bring into the room. Right? How can we deliver content to that and not the screens around the room? How can we deliver content to them via an LMS system rather than through a PowerPoint playing and matrixing out? Right? Those are the changes and conversations that we had that now we have changed.
There you go. Fascinating. Well, look, Joe, I'm going to let you go for now. We're going to wrap up the show, but please stay right there. We're going to have you back for the after show.